Hello, my name's Catherine Mannix. I'm a retired palliative care doctor, a cognitive behaviour therapist, and now I'm a campaigner for better public understanding and awareness of dying and death. I want to help us all to be better informed and to have more tender conversations with people who are facing really difficult things in their lives. And that includes people who are grieving, people who are facing bereavement. It might surprise you to know that as a cognitive therapist who's worked for more than 30 years with people at the very end of their lives, I don't work with people who are requiring psychotherapeutic support for their grief. And that's because that's a field of expertise where I have not yet been properly trained. So I'd like to introduce you to a wonderful grief therapy training resource that's been developed by grief therapist Liz Gleason called The Shapes of Grief. Liz has developed a podcast, but she's also providing an absolutely magnificent resource of staged talks, lectures, and conversations with grief therapists of international repute and enormous experience to help all practitioners who work therapeutically with people who are grieving to be grief informed. Grief is a complex, multidimensional challenge. There are physical as well as emotional manifestations, and therapy itself needs to be highly aware of those needs before client and therapist embark on their journey together. It's a wonderful resource. I absolutely commend it to you. I hope you'll take a look online. I hope that you'll join the community. I hope you'll become a person who's grief informed in your work to support grieving people.
Hi there, my name's Andy Langford and I'm the Clinical Director for Cruse Bereavement Support. I've also been a practicing counsellor for nearly 20 years now, particularly working in the areas of grief, of trauma, working with suicide too. And I just want to really commend to you the online course Shapes of Grief, which is being hosted by and put together by Liz Gleason. Really is a fantastic set of material. You know, what you'll find there is material around dying, death, mourning, grief, and also trauma. It's really rich content. You've got podcasts that you can access just in audio or also visual, where you can see Liz talk about grief and mourning in a number of different perspectives, looking at different types of grief, different models for grieving, perspectives on grieving about working with older people, younger people, sibling death as well, lots of topics like that. Working with distinguished speakers as well, like Dr. Irvin Yalom, Professor Robert Nehmeyer, and also Dr. Dennis Klass, to name but three. There are many, many more there. Now, Liz brings a lot of her expertise herself. Obviously, she'd worked in the area of grief and bereavement for a number of years and is really well qualified. So we get some of our insights too in this material. So it's really fantastic, really accessible. And what I found when I was accessing this material is I found that actually it goes deeper than just the surface level questions that we tend to find in many short podcasts or interviews. It actually goes deeper and really touches upon some of the personal experiences that the professionals bring. With such a sense of warmth, it's really easy to identify with the material, but also to then identify that material with the work with our clients. Also, it's just eminently practical, so you'll find lots of gems in there. The material is really affordable, so for the entire course, Shapes of Grief, you're looking at €199 for the whole thing. And the material is just really excellent for any volunteer or mental health professional working in the area of grief and mourning and loss. And so really would attest this course to you. You can dip into it in whatever time suits you in different ways and in whatever order is useful for you. So really do delve in and enjoy the course.
My name's Kathy Lapsley and I'm from Liverpool. My 6-year-old daughter, Jasmine, died in 2014 whilst we were on a family holiday in Wales. Jasmine's death was sudden, traumatic and completely unexpected. She died due to a choking incident on that holiday. The care that we received as a traumatised family at the time of her death and in the immediate aftermath of her death was seriously lacking. harm was done to us by professionals due to the lack of grief education and grief awareness. Since Jasmine's death, I've gone on to co-found a charity in her name to help other bereaved families, and I'm currently training to be a counsellor and would like to specialise in grief and trauma. Last year, I was really lucky to come across the Shapes of Grief education programme online and the work of Liz Gleeson. I signed up to the education programme and it is the best learning out there. I'm learning so much personally and professional. I've been introduced to the work of Professor Robert Niemeyer, Dr. Irvin Yalom and many more. If you're a professional working with grief and loss, it is crucial that you are grief educated. I really encourage you to sign up to the Shapes of Grief education programme and inform yourself so you can help up those that are grieving. It is the most comprehensive and thorough education programme that's out there. The bereaved deserve support.
In 2019, I lost the love of my life. And even though I thought of myself as a self-aware woman who had done a lot of work, I was totally unprepared for the experience of grief and how devastated I was by the loss of John. I couldn't bear the idea that there would just be this loss and that would be all there was. And so I needed to find something that helped me make meaning. Like a lot of people, I looked to some of the older grief theories, but didn't find any connection to them and really struggled to find something that helped me make sense of what I was going through. Luckily, somewhere along the line, within the first year, I stumbled on the Shapes of Grief podcasts, and hearing the stories of other people helped me to understand some of what I was going through, but also helped normalize what I was going through and make me feel less alone. Because one of the things that I'd always said about my grief was that it left me feeling very alienated from everyone around me, from my culture, from even my sense of self. So hearing other stories and hearing that people had gone through similar things really helped me. And that set me on a path of trying then to find grief theory that resonated with what I was going through, but also alerted me to the fact that a lot of what's out there in terms of grief support has no real bearing on a relationship to what people actually go through and what they actually need. I was thrilled to find that the Shapes of Grief podcast had turned into an education program about midpoint last year, and immediately signed on and trawled through as many of the videos as I could, because I found a lot of value in them, and I was uplifted by a lot of what was said. George Bonanno's talk about resilience really, really struck me. Irving Yalom's very heartfelt story and offering from his own position of pain at the loss of his wife was astonishing. And I feel that there's great value in that and in the sharing. And it's what I hope to do as well. I think it's a conversation that needs to happen, that doesn't happen well. I think that a lot of people respond to the ideas of grief counseling or the grieving in a very resistant kind of way, and often based on their own fear of death. And so a lot of that has to be addressed, and a lot of what we just sort of hold as normal in society and even in counseling needs to shift so that we are better able to accommodate and help those who are grieving, because there are more and more of us every day. And certainly as COVID has taught us, it is a heartbeat away. Losing someone that you care about, or having to deal with this desire to make meaning after loss is something that is more and more necessary. I didn't have a bad experience with a grief counselor who was untrained after the loss of John. I had a very competent counselor who also wasn't grief trained, but that limited how much she could actually understand what I was going through and assist me through it. And there were points in our sessions together where she would, in a way, try to veer me off into non-grief territory. And my sense of that is that there's a lack of understanding about the fact that grief is a very normal response that needs its time and needs support in order to run its course well. And I think that that's one of the things that I did ultimately find in the training program offered by Shapes of Grief was contact or information from people who truly understood what it meant to be a grieving person, who understood it from a perspective that wasn't just this expectation of brokenness. I mean, the idea that we could focus on resilience, that we could focus on meaning making, or that we could focus on learning how to oscillate between the losses orientation and a restoration orientation. Those are all great life skills beyond grief, and things that from the training are now embedded in me just as ways I will approach my life generally, and I think would be useful for anyone, but particularly are necessary understandings for anyone who's going to work in grief counseling. I'll take them with me into my own practice, and we'll focus on helping people find their way from their own desires and needs within the grief experience, rather than imposing any sort of assumption about what grief is or where it should go. And the Shapes of Grief training education program is excellent for that.